In 1717, pirate captain Prince Sam Bellamy ordered 30 of his men to strip completely naked, put knives between their teeth, and paddle tiny canoes toward a massive French merchant ship in the dead of night. No cannons, no roaring sea battle, just 30 naked, screaming men swarming the hull. According to historian T.S. Rhodes, the French captain was so traumatized by the visual terror, he instantly surrendered, without a single shot fired. Because here's the thing, that was not a weird exception. You picture pirates exactly like the movies. Roaring broadsides, splintering wood, epic sword fights. But the actual historical truth? The deadliest pirates in human history almost never fought. They ran the ocean using a weapon much colder and much more modern than a cannon. And to understand how they conquered the seas without firing a shot, you have to look at the one thing they built that terrified empires more than murder. Imagine you are a pirate between 1690 and 1740. You are not a chaotic movie villain. You are basically an illegal startup founder. And your business model has a massive structural flaw. If you fire a heavy 30-pound cannonball at a merchant ship, you are actively destroying the exact thing you are trying to steal. You sink the cargo, you ruin the hull, and you risk killing your own crew. According to historian Mark Cartwright, a standard smoothbore ship cannon of the era took up to 10 agonizing minutes to reload. Trying to hit a moving target from a violently swaying wooden deck was basically a lottery. So they completely opted out of the game. Peter Leeson, an economist who published a landmark 2009 study on pirate behavior, realized that the most famous symbol in pirate history was not actually a flag. It was an economic signaling device. The Jolly Roger, the classic skull and crossbones, was highly calculated marketing. When a pirate ship hoisted that black flag, they were sending a crystal clear, legally binding message to the merchant ship. It meant, if you surrender right this second, nobody gets hurt, you keep your lives, and we just take the cargo. But if you fire even a single musket, the black flag comes down, and the red flag goes up, the blood flag. And the red flag meant every single right to mercy was instantly revoked, and the entire merchant crew would be executed on the spot. It was a perfect zero-sum psychological trap. And to make sure nobody ever tested it, the pirates weaponized head counts. A legal merchant captain back then ran his ship with a skeleton crew. Just the absolute bare minimum number of men needed to keep the sails catching wind, because every extra sailor meant paying another salary, which cut into the profits. Pirates did the exact opposite. They crammed their decks with gigantic, overwhelming crews. So when they pulled up to a merchant vessel, closing the gap to under 150 meters, they did not need heavy artillery. They just stood at the railing. Dozens of heavily armed, terrifying men staring down a tiny handful of exhausted, underpaid merchant sailors. The math was so completely hopeless that almost every single victim just gave up. But to keep those massive crews loyal, the pirates had to invent something so radical and so dangerous that it made the kings of Europe sweat. Right now, you work in a world with HR departments, labor laws, and a weekend. Now take all of that away. The legal merchant ships of the 1700s were floating dictatorships. Captains had absolute, unchecked power. They could flog you, starve you, or withhold your pay for months. The wage gap between a captain and a sailor was astronomically huge. And yet, somehow, the ruthless, bloodthirsty pirates built a better society. A century before modern democracies formed, pirate ships operated on strict, radical voting rights. Before a ship ever left port, every single crew member had to sign the pirate articles. If they wanted to change a rule later, it required a unanimous vote. Every man had a veto. The captain was not a king. He was democratically elected purely to handle navigation and combat tactics. If he was a coward, or if he abused his power, the crew could vote him out and fire him in the middle of the ocean. To prevent corruption, they elected a completely separate quartermaster who held exclusive control over discipline and the weapons locker. They invented the separation of powers on a wooden boat. And the economics were even crazier. A pirate captain usually only made 2 shares of the loot, while a regular sailor made 1 full share. A 2-to-1 income ratio. Try finding that in a modern corporation. But the real masterpiece of pirate logic was the insurance policy. According to Leeson's research, they ran the first radically enforced social security system on the high seas. After a raid, not a single penny of the stolen loot was allowed to be handed out to the healthy men until all the wounded had been paid. The loss of an eye, an arm, or a leg had a fixed, contractually guaranteed payout straight from the top of the pile. They removed the existential fear of becoming a crippled beggar, which meant their men were fiercely, fanatically loyal. They rarely held slaves on their ships, not out of morality, but because pure logic dictated that angry slaves would inevitably mutiny during a fight. Every single thing they did was a cold, calculated machine, designed to project so much unified terror that violence became unnecessary. On the night of August 23rd, 1718, a single, tiny, one-masted pirate sloop slid out of the dark Atlantic. It was hunting 2 massive French ocean-going merchant ships, the Rose Emily and the La Toison d'Or. The French had 4 heavy cannons and 18 men. The tiny pirate sloop had almost no heavy firepower, but the man steering it was Edward Thatch, though history would accidentally misspell his name and remember him forever as Blackbeard. According to historian Colin Woodard, Blackbeard did not fire a massive broadside. He just slipped his tiny boat close enough for the French to see his flag, his massive crew, and the burning fuses tied into his beard. He demanded they surrender, and the massive French ships, outgunning him in every conceivable way, instantly gave up. But this perfect, frictionless system of terror had one fatal flaw. The fatal flaw was not that their system failed, but that it worked entirely too well. By proving that uneducated, impoverished sailors did not actually need a ruthless dictator to survive, the pirates became a philosophical virus. According to a 2018 analysis by historian Colin Woodard, by late 1717, Edward Thatch and his democratically elected allies, operating out of the Pirate Republic of Nassau, had effectively blockaded the transatlantic trade of the 3 most powerful global empires on Earth. Great Britain, France, and Spain were watching their global supply chains bleed out, paralyzed by a group of outcasts who routed heavily armed Royal Navy warships without sustaining a single casualty. And the empires were terrified. Because here's the thing, even when a stubborn merchant captain was brave enough to call their bluff and fight back, the pirates still absolutely refused to play the traditional war game. You picture massive naval battles with heavy 30-pound cannonballs smashing through solid wooden hulls. But firing a massive iron ball meant risking the exact cargo you came to steal and sinking the very ship you wanted to capture. So they changed the ammunition. According to 2021 research by historian Mark Cartwright, pirates actively stripped their boats of heavy artillery and favored extremely light, fast sloops, armed with highly maneuverable 8 or 12-pound cannons. But they did not load them with solid iron. They stuffed the barrels with chain balls, jagged rocks, and broken glass. When they fired, they did not aim for the hull. They aimed straight up into the rigging. The chains and glass would violently shred the merchant ship's sails, raining sharp debris down onto the deck and instantly crippling their ability to move, while leaving the precious cargo perfectly intact in the hold below. It was a surgical, psychological strike designed to break the victim's will to fight before a single boarding sword was even drawn. And behind that terrifying visual spectacle was a business model so advanced that modern scholars are still marveling at it. Economist Peter Leeson points out that during the peak of the Golden Age, between 1716 and 1726, these ruthless outlaws were cooperating with each other at a level that legal governments could not even fathom. Decades before the famous philosopher Adam Smith ever wrote about the invisible hand of the free market, these men were operating on what Leeson calls the invisible hook. They strictly regulated their own illegal markets through highly calculated, rational self-interest. They did not avoid war because they were peaceful. They avoided war because violence was terrible for the bottom line. They rarely kept slaves on their ships, not out of any deep moral awakening, but because pure logic dictated that angry, unpaid captives were a massive massive security risk if a firefight actually broke out. Every single terrifying thing they did, from hoisting the red blood flag to Prince Sam Bellamy's naked boarding parties, was just a line on a psychological spreadsheet designed to keep the cost of business as close to absolute zero as humanly possible. And yet, somehow, we remember them only as chaotic, bloodthirsty monsters. We built theme park rides and blockbuster movies celebrating their lawless violence. But when you strip away the Hollywood myth, what you are looking at is something much stranger, and in a way, much more profoundly human. Right now, you probably go to work in a legal, regulated world. You have a contract, you have a human resources department, you have an entire modern system that promises to protect your basic rights. Now take all of that away. Imagine being a dirt-poor, exhausted sailor in the early 1700s, trapped on a floating wooden prison miles from shore, working for a king who does not know your name, and a legal captain who can starve you for looking at him the wrong way. That was the brutal, unvarnished reality of the Golden Age empires. The pirates did not break the law because they loved chaos. They broke the law because the law was a meat grinder. So the next time you see a cartoon skull and crossbones printed on a plastic Halloween costume, remember what it really was. It was not a blind promise of murder. It was a highly sophisticated warning label hoisted by a group of abandoned, broken men who decided to build their own radical democracy in the darkest, deadliest corners of the ocean. They did not conquer the world with cannons or swords. They conquered it with math, psychology, and a radical demand for fairness in a world that offered them none. A tiny piece of justice, dressed up as a monster.